Welcome, everyone. My name is Hannah Henza. I'm the Director of Networks and Leadership at Lean Mood North America. I'm very glad to see you all here today. If you are just joining us, this is the Climate Crisis, a Lean Mood Festival of Jewish Ideas. And for the next 50 minutes, we're going to be with Rabbi Fred Scherlinder Dobb, who has a great presentation for you. We do encourage you to stay on mute during the session, although there will be an opportunity for questions, I think, sprinkled throughout. He'll kind of prompt you as we go with that. If you have a question in the meantime, please feel free to put it in the chat. If you do need closed captions during the session, please feel free to click the 3 dots where it says more, and then click captions, and then they can come on. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. Fred, it's all yours.
And thank you. A huge thank you to Hannah, who pulled this entire complex thing together. Kol kavod. And welcome everyone, some old friends and new on here. Special shout out to Rachel, who got up at 6:30 in the morning in Wellington, New Zealand to join us and has spent much of the day. And also to Mirala in the image with Rick Marker, who one of the giants in this field and also was on the great opening panel. Thank you for coming to a little self-examination on a Sunday afternoon, or Monday morning, as it were. Quick question. Of those who have camera or have a thumb, how many people have at least a passing awareness of what Mussar is within the Jewish framework? Okay, that's a fair number. Excellent. Can't tell if it's quite universal. I assume not. Can feel free to use the chat. And actually, Hannah, if you want to monitor the chat, which I won't be able to see with PowerPoint, that'd be great. So thank you. So I'm going to go very quickly through what is Mussar and then go deep into some of the ways that I honestly believe it is part of Judaism's unique contribution. And it's also not that unique because other faiths have something similar, but it's unique in its effectiveness. As we dig deep inside ourselves and figure out what has to change within in order to make the change without. In no way does it lessen the need to be out there doing the work now, but it helps us do it more and more clearly and hopefully engage our colleagues, friends, neighbors, and ultimately broaden the circle of folks who care deeply enough to be active at the political, engaged, social level, as well as private virtue of reducing our footprint. So that's the quick opening. Gonna do a few slides and then stop and have some conversation and repeat twice more. Let's see, slideshow. Hopefully this will work. Are you seeing Ahava Varachamim?
Not yet.
Okay. Really? Should have thought to test this earlier. Oh, right. Share screen. Apologies, everyone. You'd think after 4 years of this, we'd have it, but there's the Zoom icon. Much better. Here we go.
All right, now we can see.
Excellent. All right. 4 middot or attributes. Anavah v'rachamim, chesed v'shalom. Anavah v'rachamim, chesed v'shalom. You could look at these things, love and compassion, loving kindness and peace, and you could call them values. You could call them schools of philosophy. You can also look at them as attributes, part of the mix that we each have in our own personalities. This is the unique insight of Mussar, and we are going to look at some of those attributes within that by developing them, really thinking critically, we just might find ways to be more engaged. So Mussar is at least 1,000 years old in classic literature, but Rabbi Yisrael Salanter in the mid-19th century created a mass movement out of it. And as he said, the purpose of the Torah is to be a mensch. It's to be a good person. You can see in the very pretty colorful wheel some of the classic of the middot or attributes. We're going to get to that. And Ben Franklin, because his wisdom was actually adopted by Menachem Mendel of Satanov in his 1808 Cheshbon HaNefesh, which then Salanter used. So Franklin's autobiography talks about take 13 attributes and on a weekly basis work on them. So in a funny way, the core insight is American, but the development of it is all Jewish Eastern European. It means a lot of things. Here's some of them. Literally passed down insight, often just simply called ethics. But it's also advice and rebuke. It is synonymous with Torah in many settings. It's discipline, and maybe above all, it is practice. It takes that kind of practice. And of all the different definitions, the one that's most apt here is Elia Lopian, a late Mussar master, that Mussar is teaching the heart what the mind already understands. So the basic idea in Eastern European yeshiva culture was they spend hours and hours a day studying Talmud and a new commentary on the Talmud and a deeper understanding. The question is, what's the marginal benefit of another hour of that as opposed to an hour where the self is the text that we study? And we figure out why we're not doing what we already know is right, having already studied Talmud. The same question applies for us in the green context. We're going to get there in just a moment. Again, the middot, there are so many of them, and these are various lists. This actually comes from a Baha'i-inflected project called the Virtues Project, and it's a very similar list. So we don't have a monopoly on respect or diligence or honesty or compassion, right? But we do have unique frames for it that come from Torah. So we're in it together, and there's some really unique contributions. It's been imaged as a periodic table. Look up Tiffany Schlein, Making of a Mensch, if you don't know Mussar. It's a great video introduction. Here's Foundation for Jewish Camps version. All good stuff. So again, should we learn more about the mitzvot or try more deeply to figure out why we're not doing the mitzvot, even when we know what we should be doing? So better maybe to spend some of our time on looking inside and fixing. And the classic frame for this is the rabbis Akiva and Tarfon are discussing in Kiddushin. Talmud Gadol o Ma'aseh. Is study the main thing, or is it action? And the famous answer that, so Tarfon actually says action is more important. And right now in the climate crisis, we might have to agree. But at a deeper level, Akiva says actually study is greater because study leads to action. Now, it appears in two different ways. One is with a shin, she, because, or that, in that it leads to action, but also it's key, mevi lide hama'aseh, that when it goes, when the study actually leverages the action. And there's something really powerful about that idea that study is great, but only when action is its telos. And then, of course, we go back and study and better understand, learn from our mistakes and our experiences, learn from others, learn from classical sources, and do even better next time. So, first question to put out there, this frame, which comes out of normative Judaism, about more or less knowing what we should be doing, and yet somehow not having the internal fortitude to actually practice what we believe. What are some examples drawn from greenness, from our daily lives as environmental folk? Love to hear some.
I have so many. The first thing that came to me was flying, but the second thing was all those emails that I get that I don't take action. I mean, some of them I do, but there's so many and I don't do all of them.
Responsibility, foresight.
Yeah, thank you, Anne. Can you flesh that out? Foresight for?
We look at images of what could happen and we feel some horror, but we don't take responsibility for what we can do today in any small way. Foresight, which means, oh, it's not going to happen now. I mean, we're okay. My kids are okay. So, forget about it or put it off to the next generation.
So Anne is skipping ahead in the curriculum, as is your wont, because those are actually the ways that are getting in the way, right? The what that's getting in the way. I was initially asking, what is it getting in the way of? But you're absolutely right that that lack of foresight, lack of sense of urgency, along with apathy and a whole bunch of other things, are what we might call the yetzer hara, the evil impulse or impulses within us. They're not so evil, they're natural, but we still need to watch them and curb them. So Mirla opened with flying. That's a classic example for upper and upper middle class folks. We are among the few in global history that have such a high carbon footprint because we help keep airline routes profitable. And air travel alone is already about 3% of anthropogenic greenhouse gases and growing as a percentage. And that's only done by a few tens of millions of people, is responsible for half of that. And many of us are in that group. So good example, and I thank you. Are there others like that, where we know better, and yet we haven't yet risen to the level of consistency? Myrtle.
The volume of meat and other products at that end of the food triangle that we consume just because we like it, without thinking about the impact.
So eating lower on the food chain, wherever we are, we know we could be lower. I am a lacto-ovo vegetarian, and I keep saying that when I work more on Mussar and I conquer my yetzer hara better, I will be a vegan, because I know the environmental impact of the milk products that I'm consuming and how it's connected to the unsustainable industry. But I have that, and others of you may be eating meat 5 times a week, and if you cut down to 2, that's a great start. So that wherever we are, making those hard choices and taking the next step in the directions that we consciously know we ought to. Thank you. Maybe one more? Anyone?
I was going to share about driving a very long distance to see an eclipse last week. The tension between these are all tensions between indulging the kind of desire to kind of do a special thing or have a little special treat, and the ways you wish everyone would always act.
Nice. Right. So you can easily say for once in a lifetime, or at least once in 20 years, you can make an exception. But how many exceptions do we make that enable us to find excuses, rationalizations to travel and do other things with a relatively high carbon footprint? The last and most important that I want to introduce here is raise your hand if you are every bit as activist and politically engaged for positive change as you think you should be. Because everything else we're talking about is at some level dwarfed by the possibility that we get more engaged. Again, consciously, we know that relatively small numbers of people, as Mirala highlighted a few hours ago in the opening session, can really make a difference. Just a couple hundred reach outs to a congressperson who represents 700,000 people, you can move 200 to weigh in on something, and you and one person close to you, you're already 1% of the way. There's so much more we can be doing, and we all know it. Obviously, all these things come to a limit, and we'll explore that in a little bit. Any other questions or thoughts so far before we dig a little deeper into Mussar as a green tool? No? All right. So back to the screen share briefly. Well, so there's this wonderful idea up on top, the Bechira point, that there's a place along the way where we can actually focus making a difference. Hopefully we'll get back there at the end. But there's these classic ideas that one mitzvah leads to another, yet one wrongdoing leads to another. So the more we do, the more we want to do. And the further we move our field of what is possible, and the higher we set the goalposts to make a difference. The reverse is equally true, that when we let ourselves slide consistently, we turn it into habit, we give ourselves a pass, and then the question is, what's the next thing we're going to rationalize? The second time a person does a wrongdoing, they don't even think of it as a sin, right? The first time, I know better, right? Mentioned earlier the Yetzer Hara, which is oversimplified, kind of like Homer, as the angel and the devil on either shoulder. Do it, don't do it, do it, don't do it, right? And we are often caught between these impulses, the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer Hara, the good impulse, which is really more the other-directed impulse, and the self-directed impulse, which is the Yetzer Hara. A certain amount of it is necessary and appropriate, but too much of it, again, rationalizations, get in the way. So there's this fun text from a text that we often focus on, Hine Tov Ma'od. This is Genesis 1:31, which the very good in the creation story is not at the end of the creation of humanity. It's Vayar Elohim et kol asher asa. God looked at all that God had created, the interconnected whole of which we are one limited part, V'hine tov ma'od, and here it is very good. So the rabbis say the good, of course, is the Yetzer HaTov, but the good is also the Yetzer Hara. So how is it, of course, the good impulse is covered by the good as a, is the bad also somehow in there? And the answer is, this is why we build houses and marry and give birth and engage in commerce. We build stuff partly out of self-interest. Some self-interest is appropriate. Too much is not. And as Rabbi Ira Stone teaches, this is really the core tension in human consciousness, when to be where on that spectrum. And we adjust it 100 times a day without thinking about it. Mussar surfaces that process, forces us to think about it, and when we do, we tend to do better. So any examples of how we can turn the self-directed impulse, the Yetzer Hara, into something positive from a green perspective? kind of do the right thing for the wrong reasons. I can't see many. Anyone?
I've got one which is just there is a sort of feel good about doing something good that can maybe sort of fuel you know, a bit of an ego driven reason for doing the right thing, but also possibly can influence others. So yeah.
Nice. So for example, if I show you that in my backyard, I've got this solar panel that's connected to this little battery pack, and I've been outside all day on my computer with 0 carbon, on the one hand, that's ego. I kind of wanted you to know that. So now you know how green I am on a good day when the sun is shining, right? But it also normalizes, oh, that's a backyard thing. I have a south-facing window. I can do that, right, etc. So a very fine line, but again, harnessing the ego or other negative reasons. And turns out we do good stuff with it. Nice. Thank you so much, Rachel. Any other? Mirala?
Well, Rick and I went and testified in our county on behalf of better transportation. And of course, it's for the good of the world and that everybody should have less emissions and we should have less climate change. But actually, we just want better bus service in our neighborhood. So it was, you know, it was self-interest, self-serving and self-interested, but it's also for the, you know, good of the planet.
That's beautiful. And of course, disproportionately, mass transit benefits the poor, the people who have a harder time owning cars. So we end up doing something really good and altruistic, even if at first it's just, I would love to have more frequent bus service at my stop. Great examples. That's actually core to organizing. The theory of organizing is entirely baked around that we surface our self-interests and find the ways in which they overlap. And very often that's the case with green stuff. When hybrids were first coming out and or the computer chips in cars 25 years ago so that you could see your mileage in real time. Bill McKibben, the famous organizer, right, wrote a piece in 2002 of like, you may know me as an environmental journalist, but when I get behind the wheel, I'm a competitive American, right? And if you turn the competition into, can I beat my personal best on this route? Right? I'm going to get 78 mpg, or for some of you, 132 kpg, right? You know, I'm going to get some way above the average because I'm thinking about it. So that little bit of ego of can I do better ends up you're burning less carbon. Okay, so these are some of the ways that can happen. All right. You all see on the left the changing the world from the inside out?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, great. So this is a book from Rabbi David Jaffe, which I very highly recommend, which is kind of the first book in activist Mussar, kind of channeling this in activist directions. He has some environmental examples, many around race, which has been beautifully developed by his Kirva Institute, dismantling racism from the inside out. Then Alan Marinis, Everyday Holiness, the Mussar Institute, probably the leading expositor of this. Rabbi Ira Stone in Philadelphia, now Joshua Bodiger, and many others, Beulah Trey of Center for Contemporary Mussar. And so far, these are all dudes. But Rabbi Laura Bellows of Dayenu is now developing climate Mussar. And my teacher, Rabbi Nancy Fuchs-Kramer at the RRC is doing this. And I wanted to quote her briefly because I think the interfaith piece needs to be on the table here. Volunteer maybe to unmute?
And read?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Years after graduating RRC, I became an active practitioner of Mussar, a traditional Jewish practice of character development. As my Jewish formation grew more solid, my interfaith work evolved. Sharing spiritual practices for the cultivation of character enhanced encounters across faith for me, even as they further strengthened my grounding as a Jew. We can sink deeper roots as we open wider hearts.
Great.
How
You.
to
Yeah.
do so skillfully, that I believe is a challenging, growing edge of the field. That's excellent.
Yeah. Sink
If you do
deeper.
work with IPL in your community, whatever
Thank
the
you.
IPL local chapter is, this is what it does.
Precisely, and thank you. Interfaithpowerandlight.org. There's a chapter near you, unless you're in New Zealand. It's a wonderful multi-faith place. There's also Green Faith and the National Religious Partnership for the Environment and many others. And groups like Jewish Earth Alliance and COJEL, Coalition on the Environment and Jewish Life, and the two huge ones, Dayenu and Adamah, all work in these kinds of coalitions. But there's really a depth to it. So this is like our palate cleanser slide. Ahava v'rachamim chesed v'shalom. So up to now, we've been focused on the theory of Mussar. We haven't gotten into what is really the core for most people, which is going attribute by attribute and taking a deep dive in yourself. It's very easy to say, I'm a good, honest person. I tell the truth. But self-deception, which is non-truth, is something that even the highest spiritual plane person still practices. So focusing on where are we deceiving ourselves? Where are we misleading others by how we frame something, even though we consciously told the story truthfully, but was it the most balanced picture that we could have presented? To say nothing of the whoppers that once in a while we drop, right? White lies or beyond. So emet, truth, is actually from the beginning, middle, and end of the alphabet. It's supposed to be all encompassing, but not always. And Al Gore really nailed this from a Mussar standpoint, right? An inconvenient truth. The psychology of it is anything inconvenient we try to avoid. And this Mussar approach is not avoiding. We need to look at the science. We need to understand the realities. We need to have the sense of urgency that comes from the climate modeling projections and act now to help head off some of the worst of the invisible things in the future. It's a little bit against human nature to save, right, as opposed to spend. But saving, as in the global carbon budget, rather than spending it all now, this is how we actualize our values. Lador vador, from generation to generation. You really care about your grandkids? Don't do a college fund. Go to your state house and lobby for, nation-leading efforts to drive the climate needle. Okay. Another, chesed, loving kindness, from our initial list. Famous Mussar Rabbi Volby comments on Olam Chesed Yibaneh, that many of us know, the world is built from your love, and notes that every act of chesed, even small ones, really builds, it really creates, it enlivens the spirit of the downtrodden and the brokenhearted. And this is where I get some hope that even the small acts that we do will end up making it slightly less bad for the global South 100 years from now. It's microscopic, but the microscopic contributions all add up. And Mussar is part of the act of helping us practice that on a more regular basis without being done in by the fact that it feels infinitesimally small. Chesed and anavah are almost synonyms. Ahava, love, as in love thy neighbor, Leviticus 19. And I love what our Quaker friends have up at every rally, no exceptions. Don't just love the neighbor who's a lot like you. Love the neighbor who's far away, who you don't understand, who you may even fear, and whose destiny is still somehow bound up with yours. This applies to widespread, structurally disadvantaged groups. Black Lives Matter is necessary as a corollary of love thy neighbor, etc. So if we really love our neighbor, think about how that changes our carbon footprint. An obvious one, kimmutz, frugality. The Mussar masters say, develop this. That comes straight from Ben Franklin also, right? A penny saved is a penny earned, right, is actually a Mussar phrase. But it's not just money, it's also the level of lifestyle that we live at. It's our entire consumption. So much of what we have is not sustainable, and yet within our tradition, like Bal Tashchit, Deuteronomy 20, rooting an ethic of conservation in Jewish text can make us go deeper with the frugality. We can embrace what's called voluntary simplicity and lower our footprint extensively. Hakarat hatov, or hoda'ah, gratitude. This is a tool to do kimmutz. If we are happy with what we have, we won't go on and feel like, oh, I need the next shiny thing that comes with more of a carbon footprint. So the classic line in Pirkei Avot, who is rich? It's not a certain threshold of wealth, top 1%, top 10%. It's hasameach bechelko. Whoever is sameach, happy or satisfied with their chelek, with their current portion, with what we have, because what we have is amazing. Yir'ah, one of the more traditional ones, the word for fear is also the word for awe. And this anchors our activism. An early appearance of it in the Torah is the midwives, Shifra and Puah. And it says twice that they had yirah of God, this fear that is awe, and that's why they practice civil disobedience. And maybe the time is coming for us to do that. Some of us have already, others may be about to cross that Rubicon. But to change everything, we need everyone, and we need some who are willing to go that extra distance. Awe, fear of what will happen if we don't, awe of the brilliance of all that we are trying to protect. Let these deepen the work that we do. And then there's this great idea, every midah and its opposite. Anything taken to an extreme can be a problem. Even too much mercy or kindness, right? It means no boundaries. It's kind of like a cell, the biological metaphor. It needs to be a semi-permeable membrane. If it's too closed off, it dies. If it's too boundaryless, it dies. And we too need to find those sweet spots. And Gewalt, I am running out of power. Hold on, with apologies. I've got to go back to a, this isn't the solar panel. The solar has plenty. It's the jack that powers the computer. So really sorry about this. Totally not what I wanted on a recorded session. If anyone wants to speak up, I'll be back in 30 seconds, but go for it.
Well, Fred, we understand things happen.
Indeed.
Often
Okay.
unexpected.
Yes. All right. Now it's gotta turn the jacket just the right way, and there the white light comes on. Okay. Sorry about that. Izun, balance, is its own sort of midah. to cultivate finding that sweet spot, or what Maimonides, following Aristotle, called the shvil hazahav, the golden path, that is the middle path. But of course, it's not middle. Sometimes it's 80-20, sometimes it's 20-80, but it is never 100-0. So with that in mind, consider savlanut, patience, one of the truly great middot. Here's some numbers. Anyone who hasn't seen this presentation before, anyone know the patterns that we're getting at here in the cardinals and the ordinals? This is for both math and Torah geeks. I know Mirala knows because she is one of the leading educators in the country on 1, 7, and 50. Those are cycles of time known as
The Shemitah cycle.
the Shemitah cycle, with Yovel, the Jubilee, being the 50. So this is a mathematical progression that reminds us that we need to think 50 years into the future. We certainly need to think 7 years ahead. As soon as one Shemitah is over, you need to start getting ready for the next one by cultivating the resilience and the intensity that will allow you to cut your footprint even more, which is part of what Shemitah involves. And then the third and fourth and seventh in parentheses and thousandth, anyone? The hint was earlier, Lador Vador, right? Generation to generation. Exodus chapter 34, verses 6 and 7, the original 13 attributes were of God. And of course, we're created in the divine image, so we should work on our attributes too. But it says that God does not necessarily remit all iniquity. Where we read it in the High Holy Days, we cut it at a place that's exactly the opposite of the meaning. V'nakeh, and wipes clean. Lo yinakeh, won't wipe clean, and rather will transfer the comeuppance from the sins of the parents onto the children 3 and 4 generations into the future. But also it says notzer chesed, extending loving kindness la alafim, to the thousandth or thousandth generation. So the time frame for good is super long. The time frame for bad is 3 or 4 generations, which, by the way, is around a century, which, by the way, is around how long carbon stays in the atmosphere. So Exodus was ahead of its game. We need to play the long game, really long. 7th generation, of course, from the Iroquois Confederacy and other native teachings, consider the impact of the 7th generation on every decision that we make. Long time frame, but there's a little problem. Love the cartoon, right? The fairy tale, a change of government and climate change went away. Woohoo! We know that this is not the case. And we need to channel some urgency, some zeal, some zirizut is the name of this one. And of course, Dr. King calls that the fierce urgency of now. Read Letter from the Birmingham Jail. It is one of the most important documents in history, and there's a lot of Mussar in it when you look at it that way. Again, remembering it's interfaith. We don't have a lock on these, but we need to hear his frame as well as Torah's frame. All right, so we're actually getting to the home stretch, which is good. Hannah, how long do we have left?
We have about 10 minutes.
Wonderful. All right. So quickly, any thoughts, questions, arguments so far? So as a reminder, these are some of the attributes we've already covered. And the question is, can you think of more? What other middot or traits should we be cultivating? And these can be religious or secular. You can use the English or the Hebrew phrase. Besides these, can you think of even more? So if you have one now, feel free to blurt it out or put it in the chat. But otherwise, well, I'm going to go on and you'll see how many of these made what I think of as the top three: responsibility, humility, and honor. And so very quickly, another great cartoon, the evolution of this from personal virtue to political engagement. It used to be pick up your litter and save the earth, right? And then recycle and then reduce your carbon footprint, and that's not enough. Completely restructure global economic systems and you may be able to save a remnant of humanity. That's where we're at. And if that's where we're at, we need to take achrayut, responsibility. And of course, with it is this value of interdependence. Beautiful text from the rabbinic tradition that's kind of the spaceship Earth idea, the analogy of a boat. Shimon Bar Yochai, 2nd century Rav, this is accredited to, the parable, right? If you are really into property rights, if you're really into radical individualism, then you pay for passage, you can do whatever you want in your seat. You can smoke, you can bring a bomb, right? You can bring a drill and just make a little hole only under my seat. I have mining rights. I bought the land. I can do whatever I want below it, right? And of course, that's how the entire ship drowns. Achrayut, taking responsibility, is everyone taking responsibility because we're all in it together. But it's going to start by those who get it taking extra responsibility. As Alan Marinis from Mussar Institute says about achrayut, but really this is about Mussar as a whole. Take responsibility, says this middot, or this whole approach. If you made that mess, clean it up. That's classic responsibility, right? Everything I needed to know I learned in kindergarten. But better still, foresee the mess. Take responsibility before it happens. Prevent the mess you would have made if you hadn't been focused, if you hadn't tried to improve yourself so that you handled the situation in such a way that the right choice could be made. So that's one, achrayut. 2, humility, anavah, taking up the right amount of space, like in a group, step in, step back, right? And the chiddush, the insight here is it's considered an anchor midah because it's so easy to be full of ourselves, and when we do, we lose sight of each other, we lose sight of God and Torah. So tradition really centers this one, but it's always individual. What about humility on a collective basis as a species? So this is scientifically wonky with a little Kabbalah thrown in on the right, but there was a 2018 PNAS study, 2 Israeli researchers and a Californian, that found out, look at just the large, the biomass of humans and of our livestock far surpass that of wild mammals. Elephants, whales, right? Lions and tigers and bears, to say nothing of voles and moles and mice who are small, but numbered in millions and billions. You would think that would add up, that there would be more biomass, but no. And look at the margin. This is a rough estimate of where prehistory was. You can see we're way above, 4 or 5 times above the total amount of biomass, but 96% of it is us and our livestock. Only 4% for all those wild mammals. This is horrible. This is not sustainable, and this is not Jewish. So cultivating the value of anavah, of taking up less space when we know statistics like this, hopefully we can right size. We can do what tradition calls tzimtzum, self-contraction, taking up less space to make more space for the other. And that is the global other, that is the non-human other, and that is the future other. Again, Ledor Vador. Anavah is all over our tradition. Leviticus 25, the Shemitah and Yovel passage says, Ki li haaretz, the land is mine. And Psalm 24, the basis of liberation theology, famously, Ladonai haaretz umloah, the earth is God's, it's not ours. And we need to remember that. There's a key eco thing too, comes back to the Yetzer Hara and ego, that we need to remember that self-improvement is just the path, and we shouldn't go celebrating every little thing that we do in a way that actually lowers our credibility in the eyes of others. Nosson Zvi Finkel, the altar of Navardak, one of the great, like circa 1900 Mussar rabbis, supposedly prefigured Michelle Obama's grandma, right? Don't be better, be higher. We are actually reaching towards spiritual goals when we do this. And of course, humility also includes how we wear our Judaism or our Americanism, to be humble about the groups that we're part of. And Nancy Fuchs Kramer again on this, well, you saw that one. Okay, so humility is all of that and more. And in the interest of time, quickly, to kavod, or honor. Who is honored? The one who honors others. And it's actually honors the creations, this same classic text from Pirkei Avot in the Mishnah. And to give kavod to others, to recognize their seriousness, is essential, while to seek kavod, which is hubris, is destructive. And at the same time, self-honor, self-respect, developing our own inner kavod, is the foundation of sustainable social change. Kavod comes from kavod, which is like liver, the heavy organ that actually cycles out the dross, right? But it's heavy, it's weight, it's a scientific common word in Hebrew. The opposite is curse, which is light. In other words, when we honor someone, we treat them as heavy. He ain't heavy, he's my brother, but he still weighs 180 pounds. And I recognize his humanity. I recognize her humanity, even though we're not directly related. But everything I do affects her. And she may be a Bangladeshi 12-year-old making clothing that we might wear while living at 6 feet above sea level. Right. So we need to honor the heaviness of everyone. When I relate to someone with due seriousness, that's honoring them, as opposed to the curse of treating them lightly. And this, of course, gets back to the structurally disadvantaged. We need to bear the burden of the other. That's a classic Mussar idea. But we need to remember who is most impacted. And we need to extend what I like to call proactive kavod, extra for those who most need it. That's the logic of Black Lives Matter. That's the logic of centering the Global South and fence line communities in everything that we do, because the most affected need to have their voices lifted up, because the most affected tend to be the least empowered, due to structural racism, due to internal and implicit biases, etc. This is kavod. There is a Jewish frame for that sacred work. So that's the end of the middot. There's also hope, which debatably is a midah, but also a way of approaching. And this is that idea of bechira points. There's hope that we can find the place where we can move our own needle and that of the next person. And we can do it by remembering that we save what we can, and it makes a difference, however small. We take hope in the rapid adoption of awareness of these issues, the fact that there's sensitive climate communication tools for how we can do this better and break through. The Yale program summarizes the message. This is what works. Scientists agree, it's real, it's us, it's bad, but there's hope. And finally, all of us together in a youth-led movement that is making a massive multi-faith difference. And as great as the youth are, this is the ultimate hope. Here's looking at you.
Fred, thank you so much. That is officially all we have time for, but that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing.
Honored and delighted. Thank you, Hannah. Everyone else, please come back tomorrow and the following day. There's more great Torah and more to explore on Mussar through Kojal, Coalition on Environment and Jewish Life, and Dayenu, etc. Lots of places to follow up. Hope you do.
Take care. We'll see you guys tomorrow.